Imagine you are driving down like a really dark, winding rural road. It is super late. You pick up your phone, dial 911, and when the dispatcher answers, you just say, I need to report a drunk driver.
Right. And then comes the kicker.
Exactly. You tell them, it is me. I am the drunk driver, and I am drunk right now.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like the setup to a joke, right? But it is actually a profoundly real and honestly surprisingly complex psychological moment.
Oh, and that actually happened this week right here in Langlade County. So, welcome to your custom-tailored deep dive. We are just grabbing a fresh cup of coffee, leaning over the backyard fence, and catching up on what's been happening around town.
Yeah, it is great to be here.
Our mission today is to distill the Antigo Police and Langlade County Sheriff's Office dispatch logs from July 13th through July 20th, 2026 into a quick briefing just for you.
Because, the dispatch log is essentially the unfiltered nervous system of a community. You aren't just seeing boring crime statistics.
Right, not at all.
You're seeing the bizarre, the wholesome, and just the highly unusual ways people interact when they think nobody else is paying attention.
Oh, for sure. And we are covering all of it today. We've got that self-reporting driver out on the rural routes, some high-tech rescues out on the Wolf River, and the exact legal mechanics of taking a roadkill deer home for dinner.
Which is a very specific yet highly relevant local skill set.
Right. Okay, so let's unpack the animal encounters first, because out here, well, the wildlife definitely does not stay in the woods.
No, they certainly do not.
So we'll start with something wholesome, a call about a fawn needing some assistance near the dog park on State Road 64. Just a classic neighborly check-in.
Yeah, that is the quintessential rural dispatch call. Just folks keeping an eye on things.
But then we move over to Virginia Street, where a resident called to report they were bitten by a small dog.
Which is standard protocol, for law enforcement and public health to get involved there, primarily for rabies tracking.
Right, except the caller noted that this bite happened, quote, a couple of weeks ago, and they just suddenly decided they wanted verification of the dog's vaccines today. I mean, I'm trying to figure out the mindset here. You get bit, you wait half a month, and then suddenly call the cops.
It points to this really fascinating mechanism of human anxiety. It is something we could call retrospective panic.
Retrospective panic.
Yeah, the incident itself didn't trigger the emergency response.
Yeah.
What likely happened is, the caller was chatting with a friend or maybe read an article about infection, and a delayed cognitive alarm bell just went off.
Oh gosh, that makes sense. But for the dispatcher taking that call, I mean, that shifts their role completely, right?
Completely. They aren't managing a bleeding wound anymore. They're managing a sudden spike in a citizen's psychological distress over a totally cold trail.
That is a massive cognitive pivot for the person sitting in that dispatch chair. But okay, let's look at the ultimate Midwest moment from this week's logs. Out near State Road 64 and County Road S, a deer carcass was reported in the road.
Classic hazard call.
Right, but by the time the deputy arrived, a motorcyclist had already pulled over. And you might think he was just dragging the hazard out of traffic. Nope. He pulled over to check if the deer was, quote, fresh enough to take home.
Just an opportunistic grocery run.
Exactly. Though he left empty-handed this time since it was already moved and, unsalvageable. But I just have to ask, is this just extreme high-speed couponing? Because stopping a motorcycle to inspect roadkill feels wildly dangerous.
I mean, yeah, it does carry physical risk, but you have to look at the agrarian mechanics of the area. Letting hundreds of pounds of viable venison go to waste is considered a massive loss of a natural resource out here.
Yeah, no, that is a really good point.
But there is a strict legal mechanism in place for this. You can't just, throw a deer in your trunk and drive off.
Right, because earlier in the week on State Road 55, another caller actually did harvest a deer, and they requested a car kill tag. How does that actually work? Do you just keep a booklet of tags in your glove box?
Not quite. When a citizen wants to claim a roadkill deer, they have to contact the sheriff's office or the DNR.
Okay, so there's a whole process.
Right. The dispatcher or officer logs the incident to ensure the animal was actually killed by a vehicle and not illegally poached, And then they issue a specific authorization number.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so that clears the citizen to possess the meat legally. So that motorcyclist wasn't just being weird. He was operating within a very established, highly regulated local framework of resource recovery.
Gosh, I never realized there was an entire bureaucratic process behind scraping dinner off the asphalt.
It is surprisingly thorough.
And the calls just run the gamut, too. Out on County Road C, a caller reported 2 horses tied up outside a fence that looked a little too skinny, though deputies couldn't actually locate them. Think about the cognitive load on a solo rural dispatcher.
Oh, it is immense.
Yeah.
In a major metropolitan area, 911 calls are heavily filtered, right? They get triaged to specialized units.
Right. You get the fire department or animal control or whatever.
Exactly. But out here, one dispatcher is the single funnel for every community anomaly. Within 1 hour, they have to calculate the kinetic threat of a dead deer in a 55-mile-per-hour zone,
Right.
process the bureaucratic issuance of a DNR tag,
Oh, geez, yeah.
validate someone's 2-week-old anxiety about a dog bite, and initiate a welfare check on livestock. The context switching required to maintain composure through all of that is just staggering.
It really is. Okay, so now let's follow the through line from animals crossing invisible boundaries to humans aggressively fighting over those exact same lines. We always hear that old proverb, good fences make good neighbors.
Ah, yes. A lovely sentiment usually attributed to Robert Frost, implying that, clear boundaries prevent human friction.
Well, the dispatch logs this week completely shatter that theory. Take this situation on Balsam Street. A caller reported their neighbors were trespassing to put up a new fence.
Okay, produce standard dispute.
Wait, here's the twist. The neighbors were standing squarely on the caller's property in order to nail the boards onto their brand new fence.
Oh, right. It is the great logistical paradox of fence building.
Paradox.
Yeah, you often have to occupy the exact territory you are trying to wall off just to build the wall.
That is hilarious. So what do the police actually do when you have to stand in your neighbor's petunias to swing a hammer? We saw a similar thing on 10th Avenue this week, too. A resident called because neighbors were putting up a fence in the southeast corner that butted right up against her property line. She wanted the police to stop them.
And the police almost always give the exact same advice in these situations.
Which is?
Get a licensed land survey before doing anything else.
Really? Why are they so hands-off? I mean, shouldn't the police be able to just look at a county map and say who is right?
Well, no, because law enforcement officers cannot adjudicate civil boundaries. Property lines in Wisconsin are not defined by where you mow the grass or where some old tree stump sits.
Right, that makes sense.
They are defined by iron pins buried in the ground by licensed surveyors. If a deputy points to a patch of grass and declares it belongs to neighbor A and they are wrong, the department takes on massive legal liability.
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, so their only job in a property dispute is to ensure nobody throws a punch.
Which is definitely easier said than done.
Yeah.
Things escalated way beyond a property line over on Badger Trail.
What happened there?
So a resident told their neighbor to make sure a fire they had going was completely out. The neighbor allegedly responded by threatening to, quote, blow her head off.
Jeez. That is the flashpoint of territorial psychology right there.
Or a campfire.
Yeah, because a mundane request, like managing a fire, is perceived as a profound threat to an individual's autonomy on their own land. The response just becomes wildly disproportionate.
So the officer's basically acting like a circuit breaker. They aren't there to rewire the house or figure out who owns the land. They just need to stop the surge of electricity before it starts a fire.
That is a perfect way to conceptualize it, yeah. They separate the parties, they validate the emotional frustration without endorsing the violent language, and they establish a baseline of physical safety.
Right. Just calm everybody down.
Exactly. They introduce consequence to the environment, basically reminding both parties that they still have to live next to each other tomorrow.
Yeah, no, that is a really good point. Okay, let's step out of the backyards and move to the most literal boundaries we have, the lines in our local roads.
Always a busy topic.
For sure. The psychology seems to change entirely when people get behind the wheel or, in some cases get in front of the wheel.
Yeah.
I want to look at some late night foraging.
Okay.
At 11:35 p.m., near North Ave and Edison St., an officer spotted someone dragging an antique lawnmower down the road.
Pitch dark, nearly midnight, hauling heavy machinery by hand.
Right. The officer stops the person, and it turns out the subject had just gotten off work, found this antique mower sitting out for free, and decided dragging it home in the dark was just the best logistical move.
Mm-hmm.
And the officer's note in the log simply read, everything 10 to 2, which means all good. I'm curious why the officer just lets that go.
Because quirkiness isn't a crime.
Fair enough.
The officer is just evaluating the physics of the situation. Like, is this person creating a traffic hazard? And they're looking at the socioeconomic reality. In rural areas, foraging for free goods, scrap metal, or discarded machinery is a genuine microeconomy.
Yeah, you see it all the time.
Right. The subject just got off work, they saw value in something discarded, and they took it. The officer stops them mainly just to ensure it wasn't stolen from a nearby garage. Once ownership is cleared, the interaction ends.
So, not all roadway hazards are that innocent. Out on US 45 and Cherry Road, someone left a box fan sitting squarely in the northbound lanes, and it was actively being struck by passing motorists.
Oh, wow.
Which, at highway speeds, is basically a localized explosion of plastic and metal. But I want to get back to the story we started with. Out on Rolling Hills Road, a man called 911 to report a drunk driver. Himself.
It's just a fascinating contradiction of behavior.
I mean, we always assume someone committing a crime is trying to get away with it, right? What is the mechanism in the brain that makes a person dial the authorities to order their own flashing lights?
It comes down to the specific way alcohol impairs the brain. We know it impairs motor skills and judgment, but it also aggressively lowers inhibitions.
Right, which usually means doing something stupid.
Exactly. Usually we associate lowered inhibitions with doing something reckless, like dancing on a table or starting a fight. But occasionally, that lowered inhibition actually removes the social filter that normally tells us to hide our mistakes.
Oh, that is interesting.
Couple that with the environment. I mean, think about a dark, winding, isolated rural road like Rolling Hills.
So the isolation actually amplifies the fear.
Yes, absolutely. The driver experiences this sudden, terrifying wave of clarity. They realize they're piloting a 2-ton weapon, and they have completely lost control of their own physical faculties.
Well,
Calling 911 on yourself in that state is not an act of civic duty. It is a desperate act of self-preservation. They literally do not know how to stop the kinetic chain of events they've started, so they demand external intervention to force them to stop.
that is a staggering way to look at it. The brain is crying out for a circuit breaker because the body just won't listen.
Exactly.
And speaking of unexpected road conditions, we also had a caller note that a stop sign had completely vanished from the intersection of County Road S and State Road 47, just entirely gone.
It is terrifying.
It really reinforces that you cannot rely on memory when driving rural routes. The infrastructure itself is subject to change.
Absolutely. Defensive driving out here requires assuming the environment is actively working against you.
Oh, for sure. Well, let's pivot to how this community handles vulnerabilities. We've talked about people making bad choices on the road, but the logs also highlight the community's safety nets and the people trying to exploit those exact same nets.
Yeah, the contrast between high-tech heroics and low-tech exploitation is very stark this week.
Let's look at the heroics on the Wolf River, up near State Road 55. We had tubers reported stuck and shouting for help about 2.5 miles north of the bridge. Now, you know the Wolf River is not a lazy water park ride. It is rugged, fast, and rocky.
Oh, it is entirely unforgiving. Hypothermia and exhaustion can set in really rapidly.
Right. And the log noted that the Attack 1 unit deployed a drone to scan the river and successfully coordinated a rescue before anyone got hurt. First off, what exactly is an Attack 1 unit?
So in local emergency services, a designation like Attack 1 typically refers to a specialized rapid response apparatus.
Okay, like a fire truck.
Sort of. But instead of a massive, slow-moving fire engine, it's often a highly mobile truck equipped for technical rescue. So water gear, medical supplies, and increasingly drone technology.
I want to push back on the drone part for a second, though. Is flying a drone over a river actually that much of a game changer, or is this just a small town department buying a shiny, expensive toy that looks cool on the balance sheet?
No, it is a fundamental shift in the physics of search and rescue. Consider the topography of the Wolf River. If you are searching on foot, deputies have to bushwhack through dense, uneven shoreline. A ground team might take 3 hours to cover 2 miles of riverbank.
Wow, okay. And it's probably hard to see much from the shore anyway.
Right, they might still miss a tuber clinging to a rock in the shadows.
Yeah.
But a drone, particularly one equipped with thermal imaging, can cover that same 2 miles in about 4 minutes.
4 minutes. Gosh.
Yeah, it detects the heat signature of the stranded individuals instantly. It essentially takes the search out of search and rescue.
Wow. So it literally buys them time they used to spend just walking. That is incredible. But, you know, while technology is saving lives on the river, we have a stark warning for listeners about the things technology cannot protect you from.
Right, the human element of deception,
Yeah.
scams.
Yeah. A resident came into the safety building on Claremont Street to report that a year and a half ago, they paid a $6,500 down payment for a roofer to do 2 roofs on South Rollwood Road.
Let me guess, they didn't finish.
Only 1 roof was ever finished, and the contractor has totally ghosted them. And it wasn't just contractors either. Another resident came in because they befriended a local man who needed clothes. They invited him in for coffee, gave him the clothes, and then suddenly realized they had essentially handed a stranger the layout of their home.
Oh, yeah. That is a tough realization.
The police had to sit down and literally teach them about setting boundaries. Why are rural communities so vulnerable to this?
It is the weaponization of the handshake culture.
The handshake culture.
Yeah. In an area like Langlade County, social capital is built on high trust. You assume the roofer is good for it because you might know his cousin.
Right. You give people the benefit of the doubt.
Exactly. You invite a man in for coffee because Midwestern hospitality dictates that you just don't leave someone out in the cold. Predatory individuals, whether they are scam contractors or just opportunists, recognize that social contract and they exploit it.
That is so frustrating.
It is. The police in these instances aren't just taking a report. They are acting as educators, trying to teach citizens how to protect their assets without entirely losing their inherent generosity.
It is heartbreaking to have to teach someone not to be too nice, but, you have to protect yourself, and sometimes the logs just leave you scratching your head.
Oh, for sure.
Like the resident on 3rd Ave who lost a brown Weber wallet specifically noted to have, quote, a gun shell on it.
Very distinct.
Right. Or the person who sped off in a beige vehicle after graffitiing the sign at Riverside Golf Course.
It is just the full spectrum of human behavior on display.
It really is. So if you were to synthesize this week's dispatch logs, what is the ultimate takeaway?
Well, when you look at the mechanics behind these calls, you realize law enforcement is primarily just managing the friction of everyday life.
The friction, yeah.
Right. They are de-escalating property disputes by explaining surveying laws. They are intervening when a driver's intoxication strips away their autonomy. And they're utilizing aerospace technology to pull people out of the Wolf River.
It covers a lot of ground.
It does. It proves that safety isn't just about arresting people. It's about untangling the bizarre, dangerous, and complex situations we manage to get ourselves into.
I love that. And as promised, here is your community takeaway of the week. First, get a licensed land survey before you build a fence and save the deputies a trip to your backyard.
Highly recommend it.
Second, if you want roadkill for dinner, follow the DNR rules and get a tag. Don't just strap it to your motorcycle. And finally, trust your gut if a contractor's deal sounds too good to be true.
Practical boundaries, both legal and personal, are essential.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. We've talked about the high-stakes rescues, the frantic 911 calls, and the complex psychology of a rural community. But tucked inside these exact same logs was a call from Hill Road.
Oh, I remember this one.
Yeah, someone had pocket-dialed 911. The dispatcher stayed on the line to assess the threat, and all they heard was a man happily whistling hia-hia while working in his barn.
Just a completely unguarded moment of peace.
It is. And then there was the officer on Amranov checking out a report of smoke who just keyed his radio and stated, "Everything is 10-2 in this neck of the woods. All good."
Right.
It is just fascinating to realize that the exact same emergency infrastructure built to pull drowning tubers from a freezing river is simultaneously capturing the quiet sound of a guy whistling in his barn. It really makes you wonder about the balance of chaos and calm in our own lives and how often the safety nets around us are just quietly observing the peace.
That is a great perspective.
Something to think about the next time you lean over that fence. Until next time, stay curious.